pictures on this slide reflect the possibility of women becoming leaders in positions of power, but it was not easy for them to climb that ladder. There are times when we're not at the table at all, and now in 2021, we are still struggling to get to and stay at the table. We know that even with the changes in the demographics of our country, African-American women and women of color are marginalized, excluded from consideration, passed over, or not even considered at all for positions of leadership in higher education. As the American population continues to darken, it is important to make sure the population of leaders in higher education reflects the diverse student composition of U.S. institutions. This research was conducted in support of that goal. The quote on the screen is from University of Louisville President Neeli Vendapudi. She said, "In this time of uncertainty, there's still much that we do not know. Yet I do know this: we are strong, we are resilient." Much of the research on women in organizations has focused largely on the experiences of white women. Challenges that African-American women face as they seek to achieve and perform in leadership roles have often been overlooked in the literature. Furthermore, research on mentoring has revealed that white men and women have more professional mentoring opportunities than their Black counterparts, who often rely on personal mentors for guidance. There are few women of color in the top academic positions of presidents, provosts, and deans. The absence of African-American women in top positions in academia begins with the frequency of obstacles and setbacks, such as the intersecting dynamics of race and gender. Insufficient mentoring and development opportunities also play a key role. The state of the literature, coupled with a lower level of advancement for African-American women in academic leadership positions, suggests the need for research that focuses on the intersectionality of race and gender and its relationship to work environments and advancement opportunities. In order to meet the needs of women academics and support DE&I initiatives that benefit all stakeholders within academic organizations, there must be research that focuses on the development of women leaders and the different experiences of women of color and white women along their paths to academia and throughout their careers. This means gaining a better understanding of the barriers that women of color experience compared with white women, the sources of resiliency that they draw from, and the mentoring experiences that are available to them. Only then can robust DE&I initiatives be developed that have a measurable impact in developing and advancing women of color in academic institutions. The present study is a continuation of previous research where we explored race, barriers, mentoring experiences, and leadership styles of women leaders in academia. The key findings that of that study shape the direction for the present one. So to give you a brief recap of where our previous study took us, what our findings were, and where, so we can contextualize where we went with this study. In the previous study, African-American women leaders scored significantly higher on barriers and mentoring compared to their white counterparts, confirming a need for additional mentoring for women of color. African-American women leaders experienced more barriers while in leadership positions as well. In contrast to white women leaders, African-American women received more help from mentors while in leadership positions. The mentoring experienced by African-American leaders was provided by many of those personal mentors that I mentioned, such as parents, ministers, siblings, grandparents, and teachers. African-American leaders scored as transformational leaders rather than transactional leaders. This finding was very important because it highlights Black women's aptitude for leadership and ability to enact transformational change in their organizations if given the opportunity. Barriers in mentoring did not predict the transactional leadership style. The state of our country and the world reflects a lack of concern and respect, not only for the leadership potential of Black women, but for the leadership potential of all women of color. To expand from our previous research, we broadened our sample to include other groups of minority women, such as Asian women and Hispanic women. We then compared their experiences to white women academic leaders. The purpose of our continued research is to determine the experiences of women of color and use those experiences to create ways to improve their ability to move into top positions in academia. Has Dr. Jackson joined us yet? Okay, so this
yes, I'm here.
Oh yes, Dr. Jackson, I'll pass it off to you and you can speak about the model.
Okay, so the model that we designed ourselves, we use the critical race theory. And the critical race theory, one of the tenets of it is that we can allow people, underrepresented populations, to tell their story. And their story will help us to understand what they've experienced during their life, and in this instance, during the time that they are working as academic leaders. So we say it is a theory that allows us to tell the truth and to tell the truth through research and reporting. And today, as we speak about wellness and well-being, we need to understand that there is a time for change, and that change brings about wellness.
In our previous research, our team developed and refined 2 scales by employing both quantitative and qualitative methods. These 2 scales, the Barriers to Women in Leadership scale and the Mentoring and Women Leaders scale, were also included in the present study. The Barriers to Women in Leadership scale is a 7-item scale, the Barriers to Women Leadership scale is a 7-item scale that reflects the barriers that women experience in academia, both while obtaining their education and in the work environment. Participants were asked to indicate their agreement and or disagreement on a scale of 1 being strongly disagree and 5 being strongly agree. Examples of statements included in this scale include, I have experienced acts of stereotyping in my work environment, and I have experienced inequality while obtaining my education. The next scale is the Mentoring and Women Leaders scale, or the MWLS. EB in 2010 defined mentoring as developmentally oriented interpersonal relationship that is typically between a more experienced individual, i.e. a mentor, and a less experienced individual, i.e. a protege. Items in this scale were also adapted from the qualitative data published by my co-author, Dr. Vanessa Jackson and Miller in 2014. The 10 items were measured using a 5-point Likert scale, again, with 1 being strongly disagree and 5 being strongly agree. Examples of the items are mentoring provided me with positive stroking to encourage the possibility of reaching educational goals. Positive stroking to encourage the possibility of reaching work goals, and mentoring helped me recover from negative experience in an educational environment / work environment. The resiliency scale is the next item. Jackson and Miller 2014 also developed this scale, which we adapted for the present study. First, expert review of the measures was sought, then revisions were made based on those recommendations, and we conducted tests for internal consistency to confirm reliability of the measure. We then gained IRB approval and disseminated our survey to women in leadership roles in academia using the snowball sampling method. As you can see in the table, the Chromebox Alpha reported a high level of internal consistency for the Barriers to Women Leadership scale and the Mentoring and Women Leadership scale, as well as for the newly developed Resiliency scale. This study yielded 103 responses, with 92 reporting their race. There were 18 Black women, 49 white women, and 25 women who self-reported their races, which were either Asian, Hispanic, multiracial, or Hawaiian. This graph compares the mean values of the Barriers to Women Leadership scale for the 3 groups of women leaders. As expected, the white women's total barrier score was lower than the Black group and the combined group. The following table provides more detail. In this table, Black women are represented in blue, white women in orange, and the combined group in gray. Because this graph shows the frequency of barriers, we cannot read the graph comparing 3 groups by each barrier because the sample size of each group was different. We can only compare which barrier is the most frequently mentioned barrier in each of the 3 groups. The most frequently mentioned barriers are, for our Black women leaders, lack of opportunities to be mentored, which confirmed our expectations of what our data might say, and the need for mentoring and the opportunities that we need to develop for them. Those opportunities need to be more readily available. And then the second most cited barrier by our Black women leaders was the need to improve professional competency. For the white women leaders, they ranked number one, the need to improve professional competency, followed by lack of sensitivity from dominant cultures, which in that context, that may mean men that are supervising them, and experiences of racism. Those latter two finders are curious though, and they do merit further investigations. The combined group cited a lack of sensibility from dominant cultures, which underscores the need for unconscious bias training within workplaces to ensure interpersonal communication among different cultural groups, followed by experiences of gender bias.
Okay, so what is resilience? So resilience is the human capacity to meet adversities and setbacks and trauma, and then to recover from them in order to live life fully. Resilient leaders have the ability to sustain their energy level under pressure and to cope with disruptive changes and adapt accordingly. Resiliency is a crucial characteristic of high-performing leaders. Resilience is the ability to bounce back, as I said, from stressful circumstances. It's like a journey, and everyone builds it as they navigate experiences over the course of their life. The skills of resilience you learn during stressful and challenging times can be bad at times, in the end. And they, learning to be resilient, we need to develop those skills. And resilience can help us to be one of the people who we can say got bounced back. Excuse me. Resiliency, in this case, facilitates well-being. And we all know that if we're able to bounce back from situations in the job, home, or just in everyday living, can help us to sustain ourselves. Because mental health and physical health are linked, problems in one area can influence the other. And at the same time, improving your physical health can also benefit your mental health and vice versa. Resilience is an outgrowth of wellness in your whole being.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Developing the sources of resiliency scale for the present study was important because inevitably we all experience obstacles or barriers to our professional success at one point or another. For those who experience more barriers, such as women of color, sources of resiliency are even more important and provide the support that they draw from in order to persevere. The exploration of sources of resiliency in our study also aligns with the increased focus on mental health and the workplace in recent years, but also exacerbated by the pandemic, which really brought those mental health issues and challenges into focus. Workers, and especially those who experience more barriers than others, must have high levels of resilience and also have multiple areas of resiliency to draw from. So here on the chart, you see some examples of the different types of resiliency that people will draw from during challenging times. Identifying what those sources of resiliency are may be useful to the development of services that can benefit women of color leaders and support their well-being as they work to further their careers. Researchers suggest that we must have sources of resiliency in order to create work-life balance. Resiliency is also essential for those in leadership roles who are responsible for motivating and supporting their subordinates. So in other words, if we don't have resilient leaders, they cannot in turn support and provide leadership to their subordinates, their colleagues in their departments and colleges and universities. In the present study, Black women's top source of resiliency were spirituality, family, and friends. White women's top sources of resiliency were family, friends, and exercise. For the combined group, which included Asian, Hispanic, multiracial, and Hawaiian participants, the sources of resiliency were family, friends, followed by spirituality. We also explored the relationship of age and resiliency by race. With the exception of the combined group participants who were over 65, the three race groups followed a similar pattern. The 26 to 34-year-old group demonstrated a high level of resiliency, with Black women scoring the highest. Resiliency decreased among the 34 to 44-year-old age group, but white women's resiliency score was higher than the Black and the combined group. This decreased level of resiliency could be due to challenges in these women's careers during this time period, increased personal responsibilities such as child rearing or caring for aging parents, or both. The three groups also followed a similar pattern of increased resiliency among ages 45 to 54 and decreased resiliency among the 55 to 64-year-olds. Interestingly, while Black and white women's resiliency increased after 65, resiliency for the combined group decreased significantly, as you can see in the table, after 65. This finding does merit further investigation to explore this significant drop-off. Our final, sorry, go ahead, Dr. Jackson.
No, go ahead.
Oh, our final scale was the Mentoring and Women Leaders Scale, the MWLS. Mentoring can also be an excellent source of resiliency. A mentor can acknowledge your emotions and help you process the present situation when your resilience is low, offer guidance based on personal experience, ask thoughtful questions that create learning opportunities, and can stay in touch when needed. According to the data and the extant literature, there are two types of mentors, both professional and personal. For personal mentors, the Black women and white women most frequently chose teachers/professors as personal mentors, followed by their colleagues and their parents. The combined group most frequently chose colleagues or friends as their personal mentors. In our study, colleagues were the most important mentors for each of the three groups, followed by teachers/professors and friends. The combined group had lower mean scores on mentorship from teachers and professors and colleagues, while the Black women group had the lowest reliance on friends as professional mentors. The findings on personal and professional mentors for the three groups confirm that survey participants are seeking out mentorship opportunities. However, none of the three race groups listed organized mentor programs or senior level colleagues in their top three sources of mentorship, which were both choices in the answer set that they responded to this question on. The literature identifies these two sources of mentorship, organized mentor programs and senior level colleagues, as being instrumental to mentees' career advancement. So that is two outcomes of this research that we can integrate into our DE&I programs to focus on pairing senior level colleagues with junior faculty members, and also ensuring that departments have formalized mentor programs to support their women of all races in advancing their careers. This study was part of an ongoing research project to support the development and advancement of women of color as leaders in academia. The small sample size was a limitation, and we need to refine our recruitment strategies for the next round of data collection. The data revealed a drop-off of participants who did not complete all of the survey questions. So that was telling that our instrument might be too long and may need additional refinement for future research to ensure that participants complete the full survey so we can have a more robust data set to work with. The major contribution of the study was the further refinement of our instrument that explores the influences of barriers, mentoring, and resilience on women leaders. The findings reveal information such as the types of barriers most experienced by women leaders that academic institutions can employ while developing DE&I strategies to facilitate the career advancement of their women faculty. Thank you everyone for your time this morning, and if there are any questions.
Could you give a summary again of the barriers faced by each group?
Lack of opportunities to be mentored, which was highest among the Black women, followed by the combined group. But again, we can't necessarily compare apples to oranges here. But the interesting one was also the need to improve professional competency. Those scored pretty high. That wasn't one we were necessarily expecting. But that could translate to additional development programs, maybe training on salary negotiations, anything that could give women more confidence to advocate for themselves. That's what we interpreted related to professional competency. Lack of sensitivity from the dominant culture was one that was cited by both, well, by all groups, but by most, the combined group felt that that was a detriment to their professional success. Experiences of racism and gender bias were two different constructs. Anything with people devaluing the contributions of these women, whether they were not given proper credit where credit was due, or their work was not elevated to the level that perhaps a male colleague's work might have been in the field. Lack of organizational support, pretty self-explanatory. The lack of socialization opportunities suggested to us this was pretty low for the white women, and it was not our it was not the most important barrier for either the Black women or the combined group either. But this is important to make sure that people that are coming into our organizations are properly onboarded and socialized and become familiar with the culture of our organizations. They know where to find the resources that they need. Employee resource groups are another great source of building camaraderie and social connections with colleagues. So those could be a good way through universities' DE&I initiatives that they would integrate, an LGBTQ women, a Black women leaders, a white women, whatever there's myriad examples of employee resource groups in organizations, and those could be a great benefit to academia as well. Feelings of isolation, that was unsurprising due to the pandemic. People have been, feeling isolated even prior to the pandemic. So that was one that we believe is important that we have to keep watching, but again, did not score the highest. Ageism is another one that we will be monitoring as the global population is aging, and we are experiencing that demographic shift. This one could become more apparent and more of an issue for women leaders. And then finally, lack of encouragement for peers with the combined group, followed by the Black women leaders, identifying that as a barrier.
Thank you so much, Ray Carroll.
Thank you.
We have another question. What defined the combined group again?
The combined group were Asian women, Hispanic women, biracial or more multiracial women, and Hawaiian women, and they self-reported. So we had in the study, we had the choices being Black, white, or other, and define, if you click other, define that category, because we want to include and broaden this out to be a much larger study. And we wanted to see what types of groups we might want to include actually in the list the next time. But we definitely wanted to also include multiracial. So that'll probably be, that's another one that we want to start looking at in future research as well.
Thank you. We have another one. Looks like white women reported the most frequent barrier as lack of sensitivity from dominant cultures.
Right.
Would that be the dominant culture and leadership, that of white men?
Yes, that's I'd mentioned that in the report. It was their first one. They said need to improve professional competency was number one. Number two, lack of sensitivity from dominant cultures. Number three, experiences of racism. So those last two were a bit confusing, obviously merit further investigation. The lack of sensitivity from dominant cultures, my assumption was that they were referring to, male supervisors, men in the field. The experiences of racism got a little bit murky for me. The only thing that I could ascertain from that is that maybe they report an adverse impact of some of these D&I initiatives that are not targeted directly to them, but perhaps targeted to women of color specifically. But again, a curious result that needs further investigation.
Thank you. Yeah, we have another one I think leads into that. It seems counterintuitive that white women would name racism as a more frequent barrier than women of color, if I'm reading that part of the graph correctly. Is there any wisdom on that point?
Right. Well, these were, they did rank all of the barriers. I should have prefaced that. So obviously, racism unfortunately is ingrained into the cultural fabric of our country and organizations, including academic institutions. So we assume that many of the women in the Black and combined group, obviously have come into contact with some forms of racism, but they didn't rank that as the top barrier. So we were just reporting what the top ones were. So that one was not as high as maybe we would have expected. They went back to the mentoring, improved professional competency for the Black women leaders, and then for the combined group, the gender bias and the lack of sensitivity from dominant cultures.
Thanks for that clarification. We have another question. Do either of you have any insights into why experiences of racism were higher for white women? It seems like that has been a big topic for everyone.
Yeah, we are just very, that it was shocking. And like I said, maybe it was some type of cultural sensitivity on the part of these white women who felt maybe perhaps overlooked by some of the initiatives that have been developed to support women of color. We were unclear on that, and that does merit further investigation as to what triggered them to what meant racism to them, what they were saying that meant, what experiences they were drawing from, because obviously they are not the typical focus of racism, because they are from the dominant culture and have benefited from being a part of that culture. So we're going to look into that further.
That just goes to show that these are items that, as she said, we need to further investigate. And as she also said, that we were surprised, and we discussed this a good deal, and we just, didn't understand. So we really want to spend some time in our next study to see, do some more focus groups and interviews with white women to see what their feelings are, about experiences of racism. And it could be reversed. It could be, like a Black man could be their boss, or an Asian man could have been their boss. So we just don't know. So we need to do some more investigation.
Thank you. What other things do you all plan on doing to continue building on this important research?
So one thing we're going to do is, one thing that we've already done is in our data analysis, which we have a great lady that works with us, and that's Carol Hanley. And some of the items in the barriers did not load very well. So we took those out, and we did some what you call scale analysis. And so there are a lot of items that we need to take out and then revisit with some, with a test group to see, how this instrument comes out with reliability and validity. So that's what we've done. And now our next step is to test it again. But we also need to spend some more time investigating, doing some interviews, as we just talked about the issue of racism with white women. So we have a lot of work to do before we can say this is our recommendations for, improvement. This is where we want to spend our time creating modules, training modules to help those who are in leadership to make changes where needed. Because we're still at the point right now where the number of people at the top, women at the top, is still very low as far as presidents, provosts, and deans. But there seems to be an increase, like presidents, provost, and at the community college and level. So we still have a lot to learn, because our end thing is training, awareness. And so that's where we are. There's still, the last thing I wanted to say is we're still at the middle level, more so than the top, and even more so at the bottom level. So at the top, you have the presidents, the provosts, and deans. At the middle, we have lots and lots of directors, assistant deans, and at the bottom, there's quite a few more directors or assistant directors. So what needs to be done to move us from the bottom to the top? And a lot of times too, we see that more women of color are put in positions as interim, interim dean or interim provost or interim assistant, this and that. And so that just says to me that you're trying to, and that's maybe not true for everybody, but why can't we be put in a position, if we qualify for it, we don't need to be tested, whether we're white, black, or blue. We, put us in and help us along the way, So that's my thoughts. So our bottom line is training modules, white papers to help those, and reporting wherever we can. Thank you.
Thank you. We have another question. Is it possible to split out responses by career areas?
Yes. But at this time, we didn't really have enough, to do so. An example is from the first paper that we wrote was a qualitative paper that was interviews of African-American women who were deans, and it was 10 of them, and talking to them about, experiences that they had encountered. But then there's an encyclopedia that was done by African-American women that talks about the 3 levels of where we are in positions. So that characteristic has to be worked on. But the problem is finding people to participate, and how can we bridge that, to get more people to talk, more people to complete the survey. White women are more likely to complete the survey, but women of color, don't seem to complete the survey as we would have liked. So we couldn't split them according to their careers or position and get any valid information. So our goal right now is to take the instrument, figure out, like the barriers is most important, the resiliency is very important. So that is, how do you bounce back from where you, when you experience, being looked over for a position, or seeing other people getting the training, or are brought into networks, whereas, people of color are not. And so it's a lot that we need to do, but it's something that, Ray Carroll, Min Young, myself, Carol Hanley, who else? Ray Carroll. Did I leave anybody out?
No, that's all. That's it.
Yeah. So we have our work to do, looking at careers, but really looking at how do we collect the data based on our instrument and, our qualitative research. Thank you.
Thank you. Another question, why did you choose to use the term gender bias instead of sexism?
Well, I think it was,
Gender bias is the common term that's used in the literature. So that's what, we started with the literature. So that was where we drew the term from.
and we do a lot of reading, lots and lots and lots of reading. And that's something we should investigate to see.
Another question, have you considered doing a qualitative study on this topic? It may clarify some of the questions that arose from the survey.
Our study actually started from qualitative, and these barriers came from our qualitative research. And so some of them came from white women, and some of them came from, Black women. So we have two, help me, Ray Carol, 2 or 3 articles that are written about our qualitative research. And beginning with the deans, and then moving to more women of color. So that's where we started. And so based on the findings from this study, we do need to go back and do more qualitative, but first we're going to try the revising the instrument and testing it with the different groups of women.
Wonderful. It looks like we have one last question here. Are you considering to add more groups to the study? I am a woman from the Middle East, and I do see a lot of barriers.
Yes.
Oh yes. And this is what we did. So when we were collecting data, we used Snowball to ask people to send it to women of color to help us get the numbers from all the groups. And then Min Young, Tracy Liu, who are Asian and Chinese and South Korean, sent it to their organizations that they are members of, that are Asian, who are Asian groups. We sent it to organizations that were African American, going through their directors or presidents. And so, and then we sent it back to reminders. We did reminders, after 1 week, 2 weeks, and then we waited at certain periods of the year. We did May, and then we did August. Was there any other time right here?
I think that was it. But I was going to add that, we do want to reach, as many communities as possible. And we were really leveraging our professional organizations to get there. So if anyone is interested, the question that came from the person from the Middle East, that, if that person were interested in having the next round of survey, the survey invitation passed to them, and perhaps could share with their communities, colleagues, that would be great, because we did run into some bottlenecks with getting the data. And part of it was we have a number of professional organizations that we reached out to ourselves that we have the personal contacts with. But beyond that, it was sort of cold calling, but through social media. So trying to connect with some of these national organizations, and many of them do not let people solicit survey participation. So that was a challenge. So we are interested in expanding it to as many possible groups as we can. We just need that personal touch point to begin that snowball sampling process. So anyone could share their email in the chat that's interested in receiving the survey in our next data collection stage, and then could share with their fellow colleagues.